Okay, so today we're going to continue our discussion. On Friday, you learned from the wonderful TAs about demand and supply and what they mean. Today we're going to talk about what happens when you shock the demand and supply curves. And then we're going to talk about what happens when you intervene in markets, when you interfere with these wonderful markets that we're working with so far. So let's start with topic one, which is shocks. So one way to understand demand and supply is to ask what happens when there's shocks to a market. So let's review what you learned on Friday. We'll start with figure 2.1. By the way, whenever you come in for the rest of the semester, I think except one lecture at the end, there'll always be a handout. So make sure you pick that up on your way in. There's always going to be a handout on your way in to make sure you get a copy of that. We'll be working through this. So, figure 2.1 shows demand and supply in the boring market that Perloff uses that I should come up with a more interesting market to use, but we're just going to use the market for pork. What you have here is the standard market diagram you learned about on Friday. There's the demand curve for pork, which represents people's willingness to pay for pork. Remember, that slopes down because as the price goes up, people want less of it. Okay? Likewise, you have the supply curve, which represents the firm's willingness to supply pork products, and that slopes up because as the price of pork rises, firms are more willing to supply that. Now, we will get into the rest of the semester after, starting next week, we'll start getting underneath these curves. I just want you to take my word for it now about the sloping up and sloping down. As semester goes on, we'll prove where this comes from. But right now, just go with the intuition that consumers, as prices go up, they want less of stuff, so the demand curve slopes down. Producers, as stuff they can sell for more, they want to produce more of it, so the supply curve slopes up. So that's sort of our basic intuition. We'll come back to what's underneath that. And equilibrium is where supply equals demand. This is the point, this is the price at which suppliers are happy to supply that quantity and demanders are happy to demand that quantity. So it's an equilibrium. It's a point where both parties are happy. At the point E, at the price P star, suppliers want to supply Q star and demanders want to buy Q star. Okay? So that's our initial equilibrium. Both parties are happy in that equilibrium. Okay? So that's sort of reviewing what you learned on Friday. Now let's make it interesting, or somewhat more interesting. Imagine that the price of beef suddenly rises. There's some disaster in the beef market. Okay? And the price of beef suddenly rises. Okay? What does that do to the pork market? Well, let's think. What is the relation between beef and pork? Can anyone tell me? How should that affect the pork market? What's the relation between those two products? Yeah. They're substitutes. Key word that we're going to come back to is substitutes. They're substitutes. What that means is the price of beef goes up, people are going to want to shift towards pork. Because beef's suddenly more expensive, they're going to eat more pork. So that's going to be represented as an outward demand shift for pork, as you see in figure 2.2. So we start initially with equilibrium point E1. We start initially in equilibrium at 220 million kilograms of pork sold a year at a price of $3.30 a kilogram. Okay? Then suddenly, people want more pork. We represent that as a shift out of the entire demand curve. Now, let's focus on what this means. What this means is that for any price of pork, people want more. That is, for example, if the price stayed at $3.30, if the price stayed at $3.30 a pound, people would no longer want 220 million kilograms, $3.30 a kilogram. People would no longer want 220 million kilograms. They'd want 232 million kilograms. Why? Because now beef's more expensive, so they want more pork. Okay? So likewise, at every price, okay, at every price, people now want more. At every price of pork, people now want more. So it's a shift out in the demand curve. Okay? So what would happen if the price of pork stayed at $3.30 a kilogram? Well, in that case, you would have a demand of 232 million kilograms, but a supply of only 220 million. Because remember, the firm just supplies on the supply curve. They don't leave that curve. Okay, that's their decision. So you have a situation of excess demand. There's 12 million kilograms excess demand. That is, consumers want 12 million kilograms more than producers are willing to produce. That consumers go to producers and say, look, 330, we love that price, give us 12 million kilograms more. And producers say, no, we are perfectly happy at 220. If you want more, what are we going to have to do? What's the producer going to have to do? If the consumers want to drag forth more from the producer, what's going to have to happen? The price is going to have to go up. So if consumers want to say, producers, we want more pork, producers are going to say, well, if you want more, you're going to pay a higher price for it. So price is going up. So we're going to move along the supply curve from point E1 to point E2. Okay? What's going to happen is producers are going to say, fine, you want more, we're going to raise the price. But as producers raise the price, consumers say, well, I don't want that much more. Okay? If you raise the price up to 335, I'm going to want less than 232 because the demand curve slopes down. Now I might only want 230 million kilograms. And that's going to keep happening until you reach point E2. At point E2, you've reached a new equilibrium where producers are charging a higher price, consumers are paying a higher price, but they're willing to because they want to get away from beef. Okay? And there's no more excess demand. So dynamics, now this happens in real time. And as the course goes on, we're going to talk about this story. We're just going to move from E1 to E2. But as you think about a move from E1 to E2, think about it in two steps. One is the price stays constant and there becomes excess demand. Two is suppliers respond to that excess demand by raising price. Consumers say, well, at that higher price, I don't want quite as much. And you wiggle and waggle until you get to point E2. Okay, that's a technical explanation. Okay, till you get to point E2. Okay, and that's the new equilibrium. Questions about that?